Give us your perspective, and specifically one thing we've not talked about much tonight, and that's the state of New York. Typically, we wouldn't be talking about it because it would be a foregone conclusion. Not so much this year.
No, you're absolutely right. And the fact that gubernatorial position is still in flux at this point is an indicative situation, I think, of the relative positions between the two parties and the stances they're taking. The incumbent in elections is usually the foregone conclusion, and certainly you've seen that borne out across the races that have been called so far this evening. But, the Republicans have got a good leverage here, quite frankly, in as much as they're able to play the crime card. And anybody who's been to New York recently, as I have, will know that it isn't the place it used to be, for example. And this is being played out across a whole host of American cities. And I think that they must have a real good chance of taking the gubernatorial position at this point. It's obviously very early to tell. It's a very fluid situation out there. But certainly, it's not the race that I think the Democrats thought they were going to be running in New York, where I think they could perhaps felt they could play upon what I think was the Republicans' great misplayed card, which was to bring abortion into the election relatively late in the game. So, what should have been a relatively safe gubernatorial position for the Democratic Party is clearly still in play at this point on the election.
So, Professor, are you able to tease out two different possibilities? One is that the policies, for example, on crime, not just in New York, but across a good part of the country, the policies the Democrats have been wanting, as opposed to they just were late to jumping on the issue because they seem to be almost dragged into the issue by Republicans. They were loath to really address it.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that, the Republican Party, if you're running this campaign, it's relatively straightforward. You focus upon issues of crime across the country. You focus upon issues of the financial state of the country and how people are feeling, whether they are better off now than they were 2 years ago. And if necessary, you raise the issue of President Biden's sort of relative mental health and how he appears to be performing or not in public. That was a relatively straightforward race for the Republican Party to run. And I think that what the Democratic Party has done is to fail to appreciate that, to push back on those issues. And I think the Democrats in far too many locations seem to be out of touch with the American people. Arguably, both parties have been dragged to the extremes by their far right and far left members. And I think many people in the United States have felt between a rock and a hard place as to which way to vote, quite frankly. And it's come down to pocketbook issues in many cases. Are you feeling better off than you were 2 years ago? Are you feeling safer than you were 2 years ago? And the great nexus of those cities, I think, where those issues are felt most of all, are impacting upon how it is that the states are voting on a broader scale.
Jeannie?
Yeah, Professor Boyce, it's always good to see you. In your
Likewise,
view,
Jeannie.
what do you think, how much of this do you attribute, what we are going to see tonight and we don't know yet, how much do you attribute to history and the fact that this is a referendum on the party in power, even narrowly so in Washington, versus it's a real misstep on the part of the Democrats, say, like you were talking about on issues of crime, in terms of either messaging and or policy?
I'm going to give a nice conservative answer and say I think it's both. It is obviously a referendum upon not only Joe Biden, but upon the Democratic Party. They have, after all, controlled the House and the Senate, along with the White House for the past 2 years. But again, as you'll be aware, historically, the first midterm election of any administration is often a blowout. If you go back to 2010, for example, at this point in the Obama administration, he got the shellacking that he referred to. If you go back to 1994, when Newt Gingrich led the contract with America, you got the same situation that massively impacted Bill Clinton's ability to get anything done for the remaining 6 years of his term in office. So we are seeing something of a political pattern emerging in the United States. I'm sure Democrats who are watching would say, well, hang about, the results so far this evening have not been as bad as many people were forecasting. And of course, we are mainly seeing results coming in across the eastern seaboard at this time. It's very early in the evening, but I think when you look at the small gains that the Republicans have to make, just one seat to be picked up in the Senate, I think it's 5 in the House of Representatives to take control. Just those small number of gains that are required to really make the last 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency an absolute nightmare, both politically and personally for him, you would have to say the odds are at this point that they will prevail. And let's not forget also what's happening around the country at the governorship levels. Understandably, a lot of focus is on the Senate and the House. But if we look at what's going on at the governor's mansions, those are key states and key races because, of course, it's those positions which are going to have a huge impact upon how the 2024 presidential campaign is run and those elections held in those states. And whatever we say about tonight, I think most people recognize it really is a precursor for what happens in 2 years' time.
Professor, yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go as a follow-up. We were just talking about how different Florida looks today than it looked maybe 10 years ago, where it was much more of a competitive state. Mm-hmm. And then you look at other places like Ohio. These are big blocks in electoral votes that Republicans, conceptually can be taking off the table over the next 2 years that could really change the complexion of a presidential campaign. Do you see any one particular state right now that we should be watching that will inform us on sort of where the next battleground might be?
It's a great point. And again, far too often people get confused about popularity and what it takes to win a presidential election. I used to tell my students, forget whatever else you think. It's all about 270 and how can you get to 270 electoral college votes. The state of Florida, as you rightly point out, used to be one that was quite a seesaw state. It's becoming increasingly Republican. And if you look at the results out of Florida tonight and you see where DeSantis has picked up votes, it would seem, in previously Democratic strongholds in that state, I think you can see how Republicans will be gleeful, quite frankly, over the course of events in that state this evening. I also think we can add to that state what's happening so far, at least this evening, in Texas. For many years, we've heard how the Democratic Party believed they were slowly turning Texas purple with the hope to turn it blue. They keep running Beto O'Rourke, thinking, well, if we can't get him to win a seat in the House, maybe he can win this, the presidency. Oh, no, not the presidency. Well, maybe he can win the governorship there. This idea that they keep running these candidates who lose at one level and they run at another level. We're seeing it with Stacey Abrams, I think, tonight in Georgia. We've seen it before with Amy McGrath in Kansas. The Republicans, I think, are putting a stranglehold in key large states where, of course, those electoral college votes add up very, very, very quickly. So you add, Florida, you add Texas, and you add a whole series of key states through the Midwest, and all of a sudden, you're looking at a very difficult route to the presidency for Democrats moving forward. I think that's going to be exacerbated, for example, by issues to do with abortion, and as more states look to ban abortions, I think you're going to get a population voting on it with its feet by leaving these states, and so you're going to derive this even greater sense of red state and blue states with detrimental impact, I think, for the Democratic Party as a whole.